Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. And today, Drew and I are going to be talking about the filibuster. And it's something that's been, depending on which side you're on, it's been either popular or not so. And today, I just want to talk about how it was kind of unlikely that the filibuster was even going to happen. But it did. And now it, to some, is a defense of the minority, and others, a way to allow mob violence or allow the mob to have a voice when maybe they shouldn't. Hey, Drew, how are you, man?
I'm doing good, dude. I'm doing good.
Yeah, so I've yeah, as good as we all can be. I mean, hey,
Yeah,
the vaccine's starting to roll out. I'm kind of happy my dad finally got his first shot. Our
that's
county
great.
has not been super quick about it, but he's in his 70s, and so I'm glad to see that. So things are starting to look
That's
up, I
good.
think, a little bit, at least in the COVID days. But now let's talk about our ever aging and sometimes flawed democratic
Democracy.
republic. So before we start, I just wanted to give kind of a background on the filibuster because I don't think it was actually ever designed, and it just kind of happened by chance. And so basically, everyone, bear with me for a minute or two here. But so basically, the filibuster was in ancient Rome. That was the first time we've heard the term of filibuster, obviously Latin version of it. But there was something where you could just basically grandstand and babble and stall policy inside of ancient Rome. But for the sake of this podcast, the founders never actually mentioned the filibuster in the Constitution. The only idea, or let's just say discourse of it, was between James Madison and Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was more of a federalist, more big government guy. I guess you could say I would call nowadays more of an establishment Democrat. And James Madison to me seems more like a rural constitutional conservative. And basically, Alexander Hamilton worried about any way where the idea of a minority veto would be a poison to democracy. That was his words. He called it a poison. Any way where the minority could veto majority decisions would be a flaw. But then Madison was worried about the tyranny of the majority idea. And so he supported the Electoral College and ideas of allowing debate even when a popular policy was up in the Senate. And so what fascinates me is that the filibuster did come by accident. So basically, let me see, I have it written here.
It's about
The House,
cloture, right?
yeah, and well, it was also so the House and the Senate had a rule book in the late 1700s that both had something called the previous question motion, which basically, in simple terms, ended debate in either house through a simple majority. So if you had 51%, you could end debate. So you're not going to allow a filibuster. So now in 1806, I think it was, this rule wasn't used, and so the Senate actually decided to get rid of this simple majority block on debate. The Senate was like, hey, we need to simplify our rule book. And so they got rid of it. They scrapped it. And so the House didn't. So now basically what happened is the House still allowed, or sorry, so the House did not allow this growing, like stalling debate happening, but the Senate all of a sudden started allowing it to happen. So now move ahead a few decades, the filibuster as we know it really came into fruition during the pre-Civil War kind of antebellum era, where you had Andrew Jackson's presidency. He was controversial, corrupt, not liked by the other side. And during this period, it was slave supporting Southerners who actually would use it to basically stall legislative decisions. So you had John C. Calhoun, for people who are not aware, South Carolina politician, quite racist, said that slavery was for the greater good. And he basically realized, and to his credit, he recognized this, that there was no way to end a debate in the Senate because, like I said earlier, they scrapped that motion rule, which would have ended it. So he basically used this a lot, and a lot of other Southern Democrats did, to basically stall talks about the abolishment of slavery, which over time, we all know how that ended. And so now bear with me again. So we get to Woodrow Wilson, who is also not a great guy in terms of racial policies, but he actually, for his defense, was quite against this because he said it's a just complete travesty that a minority can basically, hijack policy debates. And so actually after immense negotiations, the Senate adopted the cloture rule, which is actually what we have now, but evolved, which would now allow 2/3 to cut off a debate. So you needed 66% of the Senate to cut off a filibuster. And so people thought that, okay, with this, the filibuster is over. Like the fact that now you can actually have a simple, or not a simple majority, but a super majority stop the filibuster. Okay, it's over. But we had the civil rights era come into fruition. And again, we saw Southerners use the filibuster as a minority party to stop civil rights laws. And so again, in 1975, after huge debate, they actually were able to reduce it from 66% needed to stop the filibuster to 60%, or 3/5. And that's where we're at today, which is, so now if you wanted to stop someone from stalling legislation through debate, you need 60%. And now, because I think a lot of, especially more Republicans or groups that know they're in the minority in the Senate, now they can just threaten the filibuster and people listen. And so it's actually interesting to see how the filibuster was never meant to exist really in its current stage, but it does, and it always works for the minority party.
It's like the it's a terrible analogy, but it's like the whole of a donut. Like you didn't even realize it was there, but now once you realize it, it's like a pivotal part. That's a terrible, stupid analogy, but I see what you're saying, right? Like I think what's kind of funny is, this idea that it wasn't even supposed to exist, but then once it did exist, then people were filibustering the debate to end the filibuster. Like people were using the filibuster to even keep, like it says here throughout the 19th century, that whole Civil War era, opponents would simply filibuster the motion to ban the filibuster, which is crazy. And I think it's a really unique thing with our American politics, this idea of the filibuster. It's definitely like a political 101 buzzword, like, oh, you're into politics, tell me what a filibuster is. And yes, it's extremely gear grinding in the Senate to have these filibusters. Basically, you can have people just spew for hours and block legislation. And the debate is interesting because, that debate of how do we prevent a tyranny by the majority is legitimate. But then I would argue that the filibuster simply just hinders progress of any party at all. I mean, if you really can just say I'm filibustering and block legislation and require a supermajority to end that, like, that doesn't really seem democratic to me. My first gut reaction is to get rid of it.
Yeah, and I'll get to that, get rid of it in a minute, but yeah, Alexander Hamilton said here, in quotes, to destroy the energy of, I'll backtrack. He basically said this is why he didn't like the idea of something like this. He said, in quotes, to destroy the energy of the government and to substitute the pleasure, caprice, or artifices of an insignificant, turbulent, or corrupt junta to the regular deliberations and decisions of a respectable majority. And, I always think a Tea Party here. Like, I think that is why in the, for the Tonic Accord here, for the current landscape of the politics, I think the filibuster was again abused by the Tea Party. And, I at the beginning thought I actually liked some of what the Tea Party was saying. They were kind of against the establishment. They wanted to see, people get a voice again. But over time, it basically became, we're not for policy. We're just against Obama. And so over time, it became like, in political science, they talk about this all the time. It's really easy to rally people against something. It's really hard to get people for something. And I think that's what Trump did very well, was he rallied people against Democrats. There was never a policy alternative. And so, I think the Tea Party was the predecessor for that. And that's why we started to see the filibuster again become a topic over the last decade, is because these guys just got in there and said, oh, we're against the Affordable Care Act. We're not going to provide an alternative. We're just going to talk and talk and talk and delay this. And so I understand Alexander Hamilton's criticism back in the 1700s when he said, this is just going to entertain the minority who is against where the nation's going.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, that's how I kind of see it. It's being utilized as a cheap political way to just stall a legitimately elected legislative body. There are some famous filibusters where they're done by people I might align with more, but still I think overall filibusters should go. Now, can they go? Can they be removed? That's the tough part, and that's where it's really not likely. I mean, again, one is you have to have a certain supermajority. 60 you said it was, to even end the filibuster and talk about changing that rule. Is that right?
Yes, that is. Yeah, you need 60% to even end that debate.
I mean, good luck. Our Senate right now is 50-50 deadlock with the obviously the VP vote to break that deadlock, but that will never get to 60. That's not going to get to I think it's going to be really tough to eliminate the filibuster. And then again, you have that problem is what I said earlier is you can literally filibuster to prevent the ending of the filibuster.
Well, and interestingly enough, we're already eroding at the filibuster, at least in certain appointments, right? Like Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell, ironically, agreed in a bipartisan effort to erode that filibuster option, where it was Harry Reid who used the nuclear option to get rid of presidential appointees or cabinet members,
Right.
which basically, for those who don't know, it means you need over 50%. You need 51% to approve this candidate. And then Mitch McConnell furthered it to Supreme Court justices. And the thing is that I'm worried that if we got rid of the filibuster, it actually could backfire, because obviously Democrats in 2020, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, if the filibuster existed, could they have potentially forced some sort of discussion before the election so things could have been different? Maybe. I don't know. But I think it's more complicated than that too, because like you had that Bernie Sanders thing up, and it's interesting because Bernie Sanders is against abolishing the filibuster. Joe Manchin is. Joe Biden said he is. Jen Psaki a few days, or I think it was about a month ago now, actually, said that also Biden has not changed his opinion on that. And so I almost feel like we need a milquetoast, half-assed compromise here. Is there a way to improve some aspects of the filibuster, without getting rid of it entirely, like somewhat of a half-assed nuclear option? I don't know.
Is there a way to have a rule that will eventually cause the close of debate on legislation, but without feeling like people are forced and without allowing someone to stand up there eating milk balls for 4 days straight, which is what Strom Thurmond did for 24 hours. How do you find that balance? Because, I imagine Bernie... I imagine, it is that, right, who's in power at a certain time. I imagine right now, Democrats don't want Republicans to filibuster any of their legislation in the Senate. I also imagine in the future, Democrats will probably want to filibuster Republican legislation in the Senate. So I can see why, you would have, all these political elites not trying to get rid of it. However, is there maybe a better way to have the rules of the Senate have a closure or cloture of a debate? I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure what that would look like. I'd have to do more digging. But I certainly think that the idea of the filibuster is strange, and the fact that it came out of this loophole almost and has grown into this massive political mechanism that the Senate can utilize is troublesome. I think it's weird. I just think it's weird that you can just talk forever and no one can tell you to shut up within reason. There needs to be a certain point where you tell someone to shut up.
Right. And I would even go back a little bit and say that I think that even if we got rid of the filibuster, then it would almost intrinsically destroy the idea of the Senate, because it was James Madison again who talked about how the Senate was meant to be an apparatus that allowed the minority to have more power. And we've talked about this before as well, is that, the House obviously is more aligned with population density and with where the country actually probably is. But the Senate is this pragmatic apparatus where it does favor minority rule. And so I just feel like it would backfire. It would really backfire to get rid of the filibuster. And it's not because I like the filibuster. But then again, as I'm saying this, it was James Madison who also said that the idea of the Electoral College and or some sort of debate, obviously the filibuster wasn't the word he used, but he said, in quotes, it would stop people who are subject to the infection of violent passions or to the danger of combining unjust measures. But as we saw on the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, obviously that didn't happen. The Electoral College or the filibuster or the Senate are not stopping mobs. His idea was that these guys are elites, these guys are smart and elected, and they can maybe like go through the craziness and make it sound better. But clearly, I think we've seen the other side of it is that actually the mob controls the Senate. The mob controls Congress. The mob controls the voices of these elected officials. So if the mob wants this guy to go filibuster for 2 days, he's going to do it not because he's going to stand up against the mob, but because the mob wants him to. So it's almost like the founding fathers were wrong. The founding fathers were wrong in the fact that these apparatuses would stop mob violence. And so that brings us to this weird conundrum where probably our government's just outdated, Drew.
I think so. I think it could use some tweaking. That's for sure. That's an interesting point of like the idea that this would slow down, like mob mentalities and trendy political waves. But in reality, in today's world, we're seeing it do the opposite. Is interesting. Another thing about that tyranny, the minority issue, is it. Let's look at today's Senate, and this is with the help of the Now Simplified guys. I looked at the Now Simplified page, and they had a great stat, and they looked at the current Senate, which is 50-50 Democrats, essentially Democrats, and 50 Republicans. The 50 Democrats represent 184 million Americans, whereas the 50 Republicans represent less than 140 million Americans, right? So you have a literal even representation in the Senate, but the actual weighted power is on the minority, is on the Republicans represent less people, but have the same amount of voting power as the larger group, the 180 million. So that right there is evidence that it exactly is that. It is the Senate currently is protecting the minority opinion more through voting power than the majority. Now, that could be good, but I would argue most of the time that it's bad. You should not have a body that most of the time is not proportionally representative of its electorate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and through history, especially, the filibuster has been used to stall popular ideas. It's, okay, abolishing of slavery, civil rights laws.
Yeah, the Civil Rights
all these
Act,
things.
Right.
Exactly. These were all times where the filibuster was used to stall something that most Americans wanted. And I hear you there. But again, like I'm saying, I think, like, yes, Now Simplified, and I know Mitchell on the podcast has even mentioned it. But at the end of the day, the Senate was exactly designed to do what it's doing. And so I think it's not fair to say, okay, well, Republicans represent less people, but they have more seats in the Senate, because that's exactly how the founding fathers thought it would work. And I understand in theory why that is the case. I do, because, okay, the House is the one who streamlines bills based on the trends of the population. So if you have New York and California or whoever agreeing on something, then yeah, like Illinois, or I guess Illinois has gone pretty Democrat, but okay, like North Dakota is not going to be able to stop that. But you get into the Senate, and now there is a more nuanced debate about it. And like, I think for a specific reason, it was meant to be that way. But again, over time, just like the Electoral College, we've now had a Republican president. Now, Bush in 2004 was the only Republican in the last 3 decades who won the popular vote. And in the same way, Rand Paul should not be able to go sit on the Senate floor for a day and babble about something when most Americans don't agree with it. But again, I don't have a fix to that, because that's intrinsically how the country was developed.
Yeah, well, like you said, maybe the founding fathers got some things wrong. Not everything.
I mean, you and I get things wrong a lot, so I'm sure they did.
I imagine if and we were probably about the age of some of these founding fathers. I imagine if we were given the keys to the castle and were told to establish a democracy from the ground up, I imagine you and I would get quite a few things wrong. So I'm not holding it against them, but it is worth knowing that, it's worth admitting that perhaps there are some loopholes and cracks in the way our democracy is set up that we can fix. Now, I think the filibuster should go. You might think that it's here to stay and perhaps for the better. That's okay. I do think, but the filibuster is a good starting point to realize, like, wow, there's some weird established rules in our government that might not make total sense that we should look at, and we shouldn't just assume that our government is set up the most efficiently. I don't think anyone assumes that. I hope no one does. I don't think anyone would argue that our government is already perfect. But the filibuster is a good example of, like, this is a weird, strange phenomenon in American politics that actually matters and plays into the power of the Senate. And we should take a look at it. I think it should go. I really do. But it's not going. It's not going to go anywhere. And because of the way it is set up, it's incredibly hard to remove. And it will be interesting to see how McConnell's Senate, for now, utilizes it or not against the Biden administration. We really have not gotten too far into, like, the Biden administration's actual legislative moves and how the Senate will respond. So I am interested to see if we'll see some 24-hour filibusters again soon or not.
And the last thing I'll say on that is that, this is the time for the Democrats, which I don't agree with, but it's the time for them to do it, because it's pointless to get rid of the filibuster if you don't have all three branches, right?
Right.
And right now they do. But the warning I will give is that Republicans also had this same situation in 2016, or I guess 2017, when Trump was inaugurated, and they didn't get jack shit done. Excuse my language. They did not get anything done. So I think it's a warning to the Democrats is that getting rid of the filibuster is not going to be a solve all.
No.
And also there could be issues down the road that you might regret. And that's probably why Bernie and Joe Manchin both aren't particularly for it. And yeah, I mean, but I think it does help us understand maybe why our country's weird. I mean, let's think about it. The founding fathers were afraid of British monarchy. They were all Protestant, or Quaker groups, like basically persecuted religious groups that were afraid of tyranny of the majority. So they came here and wanted to put in some extra, like, safety nets, right. And maybe those safety nets are outdated.
Yeah, or have been misinterpreted over time or loopholed into something else. But no, you're right. Mm-hmm. You're definitely right. That's a very good point. That they were the persecuted, so it's understandable that they would put in these, like, stop breakers. For the minority. Fascinating stuff. Yeah, I don't know.
No, I mean, we could, hopefully we can maybe eventually get on the Constitutional Scholar or something and dive into this. Maybe a Tea Party scholar, right? I'd love to pick their brain on why would this still be good. But
sure.
Anyways, yeah, I mean, what do you guys think? Please let us know. F the filibuster, or I effing love the filibuster. I don't know. But anyways, we are on Spotify, and I'm liking to see that jump in numbers on there. So keep it up. We're on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all that jazz. So yeah, let us know. Tell your friends, and take care, guys.
Thank you all.